Hello, everyone, and welcome to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I'm Jeane Slone, the author of 3 historical fictions about women during World War II. Today in our studio, I'm very pleased to introduce to you Elaine Rock.
Nice to see you.
And Dusty Rhodes.
Thank you for inviting me.
And we are here to talk about a project, a manuscript that Elaine Rock is producing. And it is titled Fighting for Fairness in Flight.
Correct.
I love the title.
I love it too. It succinctly describes exactly what I'm writing about Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah, I know titles take a while to figure out. I think you got this one.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Better than Fair Wars, right?
Better than Fair Wars. We've been through a lot of variations.
You've been through the titles. So let's talk a little bit about you, Elaine, as a writer. And I noticed on your biography you belong to many organizations.
I do.
Could you tell us about a few?
Well, I belong to the National Organization for Women, have belonged since the late 60s, early 70s. And I've belonged to the American Association of University Women, and the International Women's Space Museum, located in Cleveland, Ohio, where Dusty is from, and the American Historical Association.
That is so terrific that you have a history background, because you used to teach history, is that correct?
That's correct. I taught history and enjoyed history so much. I graduated with a degree in history geography from UCLA. So I enjoy it very much, always have, always wanted to write history or either historical fiction or nonfiction.
And that you also struggled with equal rights yourself?
I moved here to the Bay Area and started my career in telecommunications and finally got into computer industry at the very beginning, and that was a patriarchal business, so it was difficult for women to advance at the time. So it was a struggle for me and for other female employees of mine, but I did manage to become an IT executive in the banking industry.
It is really quite a serendipity type experience that you met Dusty Rhodes.
It was exactly serendipity that I met Dusty Rhodes. I met her in the pool at the YMCA locally here in Santa Rosa.
Isn't that funny?
Well,
Especially since I was a lifeguard for 4 years.
Oh.
Water baby.
She also used to synchronize swim. And actually she was on a Buster Crabbe show when she was younger.
Yeah. And I know you both had aspirations to want to become pilots.
That's correct.
Yes. Oh, yes. Broke my heart.
My father was an executive with Lockheed, and he would bring photographs of all the prototypes of aircraft that they were working on, and I was always interested in seeing them. I wanted to be a pilot, but even when I graduated from UCLA, that wasn't an option for women. So it was amazing to me when I stepped down into the pool and friends were already talking to Dusty. They waved me over, and it was one of those moments where the world just stands still. And I thought, oh my gosh, I had this feeling that something was going to change, and it was destiny as far as I'm concerned that I met her. And she was telling everybody about her life.
And this is a good time for me to ask Dusty about just a little beginnings of your life, where you graduated from, and what happened before you became a stewardess.
Well, growing up in Cleveland, aviation was just very important. We had the Cleveland Air Races, which at that time were the biggest air races in the world. And we went every year over Labor Day for 3 days, and we watched them, and we went to them, and I was going to be a pilot. And we had women pilots. We had Amelia Earhart, we had Beryl Markham, we had Jacqueline Corcoran. And I had the wonderful example of the WASPs, the Women's Army Special Flying Corps, and I was going to be one. And my father said, okay, so I took geometry, I took all the good things I should take, algebra, geometry, and then the war ended, and Daddy said, Babby, they have disbanded the WASPs. There will be no more female pilots.
That's right.
And
they didn't allow them to pilot after that.
And I said, why? And they didn't have an answer.
Well, this is what WASP told me, is the men were coming home and needed jobs.
That's right, exactly.
And the women were supposed to go back to the kitchen, enjoy their new appliances, and multiply.
Back and have babies and cook for Daddy.
There you go. So, tell us, so is that then why you decided to become a stewardess?
Yes, there was
because you couldn't become a
I couldn't be sit in the cockpit, but I could be in the cabin. And I wanted to see the world also. And it was just one of those things. I wanted to travel, and there was a Life magazine full cover article about airline stewardesses. And I read that. I said, that's it. I am going to be that. And I had that in my mind my entire career in college. And luckily, my senior year, one of the gals that was in placement service said, Dusty, there's a man with American Airlines that's interviewing in downtown Cleveland. Well, I ran home and put on my most conservative suit and hat and ran downtown, and bingo, I was hired just like that. But he said, can you start next month? I said, no, it's my senior year in college and I want to graduate. He said, which I thought was the wrong thing. He said it was the right thing later, because I wanted to finish something. So I went and they hired me. I went back for a physical in Chicago and they hired me. And I started July 10th of 1950. Went to stewardess school.
1950.
Yep.
So what was it like in the 50s to be a stewardess?
Well, in many ways was probably the best job for a woman in the world. You traveled and you met interesting people. You went to fascinating places.
Yeah.
And you were working with a great group of people. But there were some black sides.
What were the restrictions?
You could not get married. If you were married, you were fired immediately.
What was the logic behind that?
You tell me. But the men think this. You should stay home and have babies and take care of Papa. But they also thought, you know, stay home and get pregnant and have babies, and you're going to cost us more money in insurance. Because yes. I believe that one of the biggest things was money. There'd be no pensions if you were fired at 32. There would be no medical costs. There'd be no, because the men's pilots had paid for their babies through our wonderful medical system. But they cost plus the fact they just thought that men thought that, oh, she doesn't have a wedding ring on, she's not married, maybe I'll have a date at the end of the trip. But they did the same thing to my favorite school. My favorite teacher in high school, Betty French, was fired. She was great, but she was fired. She married a man in the Air Corps. He was overseas. How's she going to support herself? Fired. They fired all teachers.
You were very lucky to be hired when you did.
Yes.
Because you weren't under that law that they created.
Well, they did. I was hired in 50, but they didn't have the law until 53.
Right.
So I was grandmothered into I wouldn't be fired. But anyone that was a stewardess then would not be fired. Anyone after 53, you're out.
So again, I wanted to reiterate, they changed the law within 3 years.
That's right.
And you had to retire at age 32.
That's right.
But you got to be a stewardess for 44 years.
That's right. And it was good that I could fight for it, but I wasn't fighting for my job. I was fighting for somebody else's.
Yeah.
And that looks better.
Well, before we get into your amazing record of political activism, it's just fascinating to hear about all the celebrities that you got to meet. And Elaine explained to me the reason why you got to meet so many celebrities. There weren't private jets back then.
There were no private jets, and the passengers didn't have computers, so they talked to us.
There were no TV shows on
No
board.
TV, no movies. So they
No
talked to
movies.
us.
Oh.
And it was all first class. There was no coach.
Uh-huh.
And all the businessmen, their companies were paying for it.
And it was very expensive to fly.
It was expensive, but not as expensive as it is today. It was terrible today in first class because you're paying for a bed, you're paying for pajamas, you're paying for a gourmet meal, you're paying for everything.
So tell us about some of the celebrities that you got to meet.
Well, first of all, when I was based in LA, I had so many movie stars on board, but I also had wonderful politicians. I had my best passenger, the most exciting passenger was Eleanor Roosevelt. And I got to sit and talk to her for about 20 minutes because the seatbelt sign was on. And I got to talk to her, and she was charming and lovely. And I remember telling her that my family was very, very, very Republican, but I had become a Democrat. And she turned to me, she said, "Why did you become a Democrat?" And I said, "Management." She said, "Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha." And I had her son, Jimmy Roosevelt, on board. He was just as charming as his father. That smile was just... And I had Senator Kuechel and Senator Goldwater and a lot of people, and I would talk to them about our problems because we had time to talk, and they were interested. We were on the same level then. Now it's some of the manners and the way people dress is you don't want to talk to them. They're mad as hell, first of all, when they get on the airplane, have to spend 2 hours taking off their shoes, putting them back on. And then they sit down and the person in front of them is in their lap. So they're not happy, and it's not a good job. Then it was a different world. We were nicer people then too. We truly were. Americans were much better, had much better manners.
And you got to meet President Richard Nixon?
Well, I wasn't president then. He was vice president when I met him, because by that time I was really Democratic.
Oh, I see.
But I had him on board, and I had him on board the night before he and Pat were coming out to the Rose Bowl, and he was the Grand Marshal. And I met 3 people on the airplane that trip, and I was having a date with a brand new boy, pretty good, who was taking me to the Rose Bowl and the parade and all this good stuff. And so I told him, I said, "Well, I'll see you tomorrow at the Rose." He said, "Well, where are you sitting? Do you know?" I said, "Yes, we're sitting right where the cameras are, right on that corner of Orange Grove and Colorado." And he said, "Oh," he said, "well, be sure to do this." He said, "When we go by, don't say hi Dick, hi Pat. Say hi Pat, hi Dick. So I'll know." So, by golly, turned the corner and I yelled, "Hi Pat, hi Dick," and stood up and waved, and he said, "Hi Dusty." Well, my date looks at me.
He was impressed?
And I said, "Friends and family."
Friends and family.
There had many things like that. It was just wonderful. And and we had a lot of movie stars. I had Rock Hudson, Marilyn Monroe, Betty Davis, who was charming, Barry Goldwater, who was not. And but that was one of the great parts of the job, but part of the best of it was traveling and seeing the world. Mm-hmm. How can you not love seeing the Elgin Marbles in London, Cats, Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, boy, what
Sing
memories.
Lava Wham at the Sydney Opera House. Although that was on layovers. We're being paid to do this. Catching fish and cooking them on the airplane.
Well, now we should talk about the whole meat of the book.
Yes.
How did you start becoming politically a political activist in the 50s and 60s for stewardesses and really for stewards.
That's right.
Yeah. So what was, how
Well,
did that occur?
the 19
And here you were over the old age of 32.
No, I wasn't. I started fighting it for it in 1953. I was just 30, I was just, started 22, I was just 25.
Oh.
But the contract came out and they put in this lovely sentence, any stewardess at age 32 would be fired automatically. Well, I was so angry at the marriage one because of my experience in Ohio with my favorite teacher, and I thought, you know, this is just, what's with this? Why do women take such crap? Mm-hmm. And I just kept talking about it, and the gal that had negotiated it was very happy that at least she was able to save those that were still with the airline. And so we started fussing about it, and I was on the contract team in 1963, and that was our major goal, was to get rid of that. And we weren't getting anywhere in negotiations, so we had a press conference, and we had a bunch of good-looking 32-year-old dollies. And when you say the word airline stewardess in those days, boom, the men came running, and we had a press conference, and there must have been 50 people there. And
and where was this?
it was in New York,
Uh-huh.
and we had a press. I'm trying to think of. I can't remember where it was, but it was in a big place, and we hit the front page in 17 newspapers.
And
We were
so what
lucky.
did the paper say about
They took
conference?
pictures of it, and they said, "Can you tell which one shouldn't be flying?"
They
And
had 8 stewardesses. 4 of them were under 32, 4 of them were over 32, and their whole premise was to say, can you tell the difference? And then Dusty stepped out of the line of stewardesses and captured their attention by saying, I may not be a Lolita.
No, I said, of Lolita, I'm not.
Lolita.
But does that make me an old bag at 32?
Right.
And they, and applause and so forth.
Her quote and her picture and the pictures of the 8 stewardesses were
hit the paper,
hit the newspapers countrywide. And
Nothing happened that day.
Basically started a debate in the United States as to why were the airlines using the sexuality of females to sell tickets.
Oh.
2 reasons: money and they wanted young girls. They wanted possible dates on the other end of the line.
Mm-hmm. And then you ended up in Washington, D.C.
Well, it was in 1958 by the president of our union appointed me as our legislative representative. I had been flying to Washington a lot, and I had learned a lot about Washington, and I loved politics. And I was dating a congressman who shall remain nameless. But I also met a gal there that worked for Congresswoman Martha Griffiths. And Martha Griffiths, I didn't know who she was a very avant-garde for women's rights. And she was good looking and had a mouth that wouldn't quit. She could say it like it is, and she didn't hesitate to. And having met Martha, and so I would tell Ann something. We got a girdle check this morning. She said, a girdle check? What's that? Oh, they come up. We had to wear girdles. They'd come up and hit you on the rear end to make sure you're wearing your girdle. I said, I feel like a horse. You want to see my teeth? And so she said, oh, wait till I tell Martha. Oh, wait till I tell Martha. Then they found out that we were fired at age 32, or we were fired. She said, oh, wait till I tell Martha. Well, finally, I met Martha, and we became wonderful friends, and she could not believe it, and she just went on, and she was the one that they had hearings. And the president of United Airlines came out and said, well, the image of a stewardess is of a young single girl. And Martha said, sir, what are you running, an airline or a whorehouse? Well, that went ballistic. That went around the country. And so we had a lot of assets in Washington. We really did. And I loved and Congress was entirely different then. Republicans spoke to Democrats. They enjoyed each other. They had cocktails with each other. Nowadays, they pull out a knife, and it's awful. It's an entirely different Congress, entirely different political world.
So tell us about, or maybe Elaine should tell us about Dusty being a lobbyist, a union lobbyist.
One of the things I wanted to mention was Martha Griffiths was the key person to get the Equal Rights Amendment out of Congress to be voted upon by the states. So she was.
I was in the lobby. I was in the gallery, and Emanuel Seller, who was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, came out and said, "Comparing a woman to a man is like comparing a horse chestnut to a horse. Well, you do not make any noise when you're in the gallery, but this groan that went through the gallery. Oh, comparing a horse. Oh." And Martha was able to get the ERA out by some parliamentary procedures that she really knew what she was doing. She knew Robert's Rules of Order, and she got it out of Congress. Then she also got the word sex discrimination in the Civil Rights Bill. It wasn't age discrimination, it was gender discrimination that Martha was able to get in. And that's what saved us.
Sex was originally proposed by a senator from the southern states, Smith, and he proposed it on the floor as a joke because he was hoping that perhaps they wouldn't vote for the Civil Rights Act
because of that one thing.
Because of that one word, sex. Mm-hmm. And they laughed about it, but Martha immediately came out and said, "You know, you're going to have to go home and speak to your wives about why you didn't pass the Civil Rights Act because of sex. How do you think they're going to feel?" And so Martha was instrumental in getting that word to stick to the Civil Rights Act.
That's right.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about more of Dusty's political activism and all the publicity surrounding it?
When she retired, she became, had a lot of honors bestowed on her for the lobbying efforts that she did for overturning essentially the age 32 rule, which didn't happen, by the way, until 1968, after the EEOC finally came out against it. But one of the reasons she had so many accolades and why she is well known as a women's rights activist is on behalf of Jeane Montague, who is a colleague of hers, and she was representing her as a union negotiator. They knew that after the Civil Rights Act was passed, that the EEOC office, the agency that was going to determine discrimination as a result of the Civil Rights Act, was opening their agency on a particular day. So Dusty and Jeane were the first people in the doors when the EEOC office opened in their uniforms.
Full uniform, spick, spack, and white gloves, the whole bit.
And as she tells the story, they saw that boxes were still being unopened and typewriters being taken out of the box. They were still opening the office. And one of the ladies came up to her and said, "Why are you two here?"
"You're free, white, and 21. What are you doing here?" These were all black, young black lawyers, all black women. "What are you doing here? You're free, white, and 21. I said, "Sit down, honey. I got a story to tell you." And we did.
And they did, and the first discrimination complaint in the country was filed that day.
Oh.
And
The
that
EEOC.
was theirs, at the EEOC. Mm-hmm. So that made a huge difference, number one, in other airline stewardesses coming in and also filing complaints.
There wasn't even any now. There was no now then?
Right, this
no.
was before NOW was even thought of, and so it was before anybody really was thinking too much about the second wave of the women's movement. So one of the biggest accolades, going back to her, how I believe she's rather famous in the women's rights movement, is she, once we met Gloria Steinem in 2014, she says to Gloria, "You know, after all these years, I haven't had an opportunity to say thank you for everything that you've done for women." And Gloria, without a beat, turns to her and she says, "Oh, no, Dusty, you were the one who started it all." And that's true. One of the premises of my books is we don't think about what happened before the 60s when we talk about the women's movement. And there was an awful lot going on between 1920, when we first got the vote, all the way up to Betty Friedan and the beginnings of the National Organization.
The unsung heroines.
The unsung heroines.
Yes.
There's a gap there. And I want to prevent historical amnesia from happening, and I think her story is worth telling.
Definitely. So, boy, it's so many things happened. It's just astonishing to hear about.
Also, just recently, one of the things that I think Santa Rosa could be proud of is there's an organization that called the National Women's History Project, and founded here by Molly McGregor, and they sponsor women for and have a presidential proclamation that every March is Women's Rights Month. And so I nominated Dusty, I wasn't the only one, for 2017 to be, and she was accepted as an honoree as one of 10 women in the country, trailblazers in labor and business.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I got my congratulations in 1968 when the EEOC made their decision. That was my joy.
And they finally overturned the age discrimination rule and marriage.
Look at how long it took.
It took a long time.
The bill started in 1953, and it took 15 years to get it through, and it was only a miracle, because in '58, after that, we had a Republican in the White House. And they appoint, on any 5-man board, there will be 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats with the Republican president, and there'll be 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans with the Democratic president. And thank God, I called Martha Griffiths because we were threatening a strike, and I knew we would never get to, that it wouldn't work. 22-year-old girls are not going on strike for 32-year-old girls. They're never going to be 32. And I called Martha and I said, "Martha, we have a problem. Our big issue is the 32-year thing." I said, "It's been years since they had the hearings. Just call them up and make them to make a decision one way or the other, but just make a decision." Next day, boom, it was all over.
It'd be really interesting to find out who made that decision.
Yes.
Who did Martha Griffiths talk to? Because the decision was made the very next day after her phone call.
Oh.
So we still don't know.
I also was very curious about when you were the word changed from stewardess to flight attendant. When you became a flight attendant during the Vietnam War, what that was like to be a flight attendant with the troops.
It was wonderful. It was the best flying I ever had. They were, first of all, the military we were always our best passengers. I don't know why, but there was just something, maybe they knew that we had a lot of discipline too or something, but they've always treated us, enlisted men and officers, always were our best passengers. And my father was in World War I, my brother was in World War II, my grandmother had 5 grandsons in the war, and they all came back. My best girlfriend lost her brother, so we were in the war. And these boys, they were much younger than we were, but we'd all had experience with the guys during the war, and they were our younger brothers or our cousins or our nephews, and they were going to a lousy war. But they were just darling, and we really enjoyed having them with us, and we tried to make it as good a trip as it could, as fun. It's not going to be all discipline and so forth. We had a good time, and we joked, and we made lemonade with a little vodka in it, and we did some funny things. We had a good time. We really did.
And Elaine told me what you said over the PA system for the soldiers going to
Well,
Vietnam?
when you land, our first stop was Honolulu and then Okinawa, and then we had to turn around to Vietnam. And what do you say?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you say? Go ahead, enjoy having you with us today. Have a good trip. We'll see you later.
You can't say the same old
and
thing.
I did not know what to say. And I excused myself. I went to the cockpit. I said, I thought, I really prayed that I would say something that would mean something to them. Here I go. And, excuse me. I came back and I said, gentlemen, we've been flying with you for some time now, and we've really enjoyed having you on board with us. But we want to make a promise. We're going to be flying over here. They call the airplane the Freedom Bird. I said, we're going to be flying over here on the Freedom Bird for as long as you're here. We promise you that. We want you to promise us that you will be here and we'll take you back to the world.
Yeah.
Then a year later, a guy came running up the steps and he said, you kept your promise. Oh, God. And we had about 5 or 6 of them on board. They were just great. We just loved them.
To see him again.
Yeah.
It was dangerous duty for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pilots
Yeah.
and the stewardesses as well at that time.
Yes,
We
and
shot
that's
it.
something to think about, that you weren't just serving food.
No.
You were serving, helping them cope
Yes.
with being able to go, but it was also dangerous
Yes, it
just
was,
for
but-
you to go.
But minimal. And I never will forget one, because we did make some funny PAs too. I introduced the flight attendants as Kitty Litter and Chi Chi Cherry and Boom Boom LaRue, and so they knew we were going to have a good time. But the colonel got off when we landed back in L.A., because I always really wanted to make something thanking them for their service and step off proud and so forth and so on. And this colonel came up to me, he said, thank you for taking such good care of my troops. And I said, they're my troops too, Colonel.
Oh,
He said, I can tell.
oh, that is wonderful.
Yeah.
So they were, when they flew into Vietnam, shot at many times. One of the stories I think is kind of interesting is one time they were landing, and was it Da Nang?
No, we were flying. We took off from Da Nang, and we did not have passengers on board, which was bad. We wanted, but sometimes we would ferry empty airplanes on the way home usually. And I said, what's that funny hissing sound? I went back, and there was, by the aft exit, the slide was a psst, psst. So I went up the cockpit. I said, we got a problem back here, Cap. Come up. So they came back. They went, oh, God, we have a leak. So we took all the pillows and pushed them in there. When we got it back, we got into the next stop, and they had shells in the exit slide.
Oh,
And she had been standing right by that
my.
slide when they were shot at. So
But it went
she
in and
was-
went.
But she was lucky that the
Yeah.
slide was there.
I want to change gears a little bit and ask you, Elaine, for the writers that watch this show, that you have written quite a lot about Dusty, but you are very interested in having a publishing company want to publish your manuscript.
Correct.
And what that entails.
Well, it's a lot different than writing fiction, or submitting a manuscript of fiction to
Because
either an
it's-
agent or a publisher.
It's a historical biography.
Correct. It's a historical biography, a narrative biography. And you're required to send in a proposal, whether it's an agent or a publisher, a book proposal that's like a business plan.
Mm-hmm.
It includes an overview, it includes how you intend to market it, how you intend to promote it, comparing other books that are similar to what you're writing, outline in a couple of chapters. And then if they're intrigued enough, they'll propose a contract with an advance possibly, although those are getting more meager by the day, then they will ask you to have a full, complete manuscript by a certain amount of time, usually 6 to 9 months. And so I've been working on that, and I have to say that the Redwood Writers Organization has been absolutely wonderful in supporting me and writers too, and I've learned an awful lot between them and the people there and the Nonfiction Authors Association as well. So it's been a process, and I have interviewed Dusty for since 2014 for a year and a half, transcribed them in the past year, still have a couple more to go, interviews. I have about 60 hours of interviews. So there's so many anecdotes that she has told. It's going to be a challenge to put them all together and which ones to eliminate.
44 years of fun.
Yeah, and so it's been wonderful getting to know her and putting this together.
Well, I wanted to thank you, Elaine, for continuing to write this manuscript. I'm sure a publisher is going to be very happy to get a hold of this.
I think so.
The title, Fighting for Fairness in Flight, to hear of all of Dusty's accomplishments, and you seem like you would be the perfect author.
Well, I know that she's been written about before when I did my research after meeting her.
Plenty of publicity.
Gail Collins has mentioned her EEOC activities in when everything changed. Flora Davis wrote Moving the Mountain and dedicated her first chapter to Dusty, and it's used as a textbook for women's studies programs today.
That will be excellent using your book.
I actually ran into someone on an airline flight and told them about Dusty, and this fellow turns around to me, oh, well, I had a roommate at UC Santa Cruz who wrote a paper on Dusty Rhodes. And I said, you've got to be kidding. Here I am. That was serendipity as well.
Yeah.
And I thought at every step of the way it has been a series of serendipitous occasions where people either know of or heard of her or has been able to help me through these things. So
Don't forget, too, having a name like Dusty Rhodes helped a lot. People remembered the name.
And where did you get that name, Dusty?
Well, if your last name is Rhodes and you're not called Dusty, you must be a real geek, because I don't know of anyone with the last name of Rhodes that doesn't get the nickname Dusty.
Oh.
Especially when you spell it the way we do.
Huh.
I only know one person whose last name was Rhodes, and he was a congressman, and he was not called Dusty, and he was a geek.
And Dusty, I really want to thank you for how tenacious you are. You are an amazing woman, that you kept after the rights, the equal rights for women, and really also for men.
Yes, I love what one of my friends said, that it changed an airline, an industry, and a country. And we had men in the cabin now, too. We had women in the cockpit and men in the cabin.
Yeah.
So it's just...
That you were the lobbyist for the nation's largest stewardess union.
Yes, it was great.
And American Airlines today is the largest independent union in the country. And
we once were affiliated with the pilots, which was a mistake.
So I'd like to thank you both for allowing me to interview you, and we certainly are looking forward to the book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us.
WriterSpeak is sponsored by the C Media Lab in Santa Rosa and the Sonoma County Gazette. Please join us next time for another exciting episode of WriterSpeak.